Great. Well, hey, everybody. Thank you for being here today. First off, just from our initial conversations, right? I want to let you know that I really appreciate you taking your time to be here today. I value what each and every one of you does. And I also appreciate CCAR for having me here today. With that being said, I'll go ahead and get started. We can. Okay, I'm having a problem getting into the full screen mode, but that's okay. We'll go ahead and get started. So this is the basics of psychedelic-assisted recovery for professionals. My name is Mark Guckel. I'm a recovery coach professional and a paralegal. I'm also a certified integration coach, and as a paralegal, I am a member of the Psychedelic Bar Association. One of the first things that I like to do before I get started is to let people know that there may be some things that I say today that are a little bit uncomfortable. Anybody here affected by trauma? Anybody perchance? Well, for the people that don't raise your hand, maybe you just don't understand some of the things that go on that can deeply affect us. But these memories last with us. Some of the things that I say may bring flashbacks or be triggering to you. In addition, some of the things that I say may challenge what you believe, and I do ask you to practice open-mindedness. One of the biggest reasons that I'm doing this, and I threw this slide in to show you some of the things that are getting ready to happen in the United States. Very recently, the Veterans Administration said that they were going to begin doing research with MDMA and psilocybin. And what becomes interesting about that is the government's usually the last one to come around. They're going to help a population that really needs the help. But most importantly, they're going to put numbers onto all of this. So we're going to be able to show that it's effective or if it isn't. In addition, the Biden administration, there was a letter released that said that a number of agencies are considering what the next steps will be when MDMA and psilocybin become available in therapy. So there's a lot of stuff that's going on. If you do want to contact me or if you want to follow me, this is a great time to take a screenshot. Sometimes I am slow on getting back on emails, but if it's something that's important, please put that at the top of the email. Some of the most important things that we have to look at with this are perhaps the words we use or what our conceptions are. So what are the words? Now, these are really geared for people that don't have experience or that may have some doubts or really have no opinion. This isn't geared for people who work in the psychedelic space. What words come to mind when you hear the word psychedelic? Do you see psychedelics as a drug, or would it be possible to see them as a medicine? What do you think about people that use psychedelics, especially people with past addictive behaviors or that are in recovery? Do you think that maybe people that are in recovery could use psychedelics? And if so, could they call themselves abstinent? Now, I'll tell you a little bit about me really quick. For my entire life, I've suffered with a multi-generational treatment-resistant affliction. I've dealt with crack addiction. I picked it up at a very young age. And I think one of the good things and one of the bad things was this ran in my family. By this point in time, my mom was a counselor at Gunster House in Bridgeport, Connecticut, and I did whatever she told me to do to try to get right. One of the reasons was because, and I had mentioned that this is multi-generational. My mom, I lost both my uncles and my aunt to this. It was always something that was reinforced that, if I continued to use, I would end up to be like them. And to me, they were some of the most precious human beings that I knew. They were beautiful people that lost their lives early, and I was always concerned. So detoxes, rehabs, I was very actively involved with Narcotics Anonymous. I wrote an article that was featured in Alcoholics Anonymous Grapevine in June of 2014. As a consequence of my addiction, I spent 14 years in prison over 8 different sentences. Finally, at the end in 2016, I saw my recovery evolving, and I started a refuge recovery in 2016. Now, again, right, I had really good years. Like I would get a year, 2 years, sometimes close to 3 years, and then I would always seem to fall out. And in 2016, my dad died. My dad passed after a very short episode of cancer, and when he did, we had a really poor relationship. Um, he was a disciplinarian. I still remember some of his words today. I always prefer to be hit rather than to hear some of the stuff that I heard. And I remember spending a lot of time in my closet. That was the safest place for me to be. And I had my imagination. So anyway, when he passed, he left me $2.6 million. And I did really well for a while. I helped a lot of people out, but something went wrong. And this is where I ended up living for 2 years. I was in this bathroom getting high. I was smoking $3,000 worth of crack a day. I was wondering why I was alive. I would smoke $50 worth of dope at a time, 3 pipes going simultaneously. And my ankles were 28 inches around. I had sores all over my body because of the refuse that I had. The house was full of black flies, and I actually got worms. I think they were roundworms in some of the sores, and I was pretty much dying. But a lot of people were coming to my house. They were trying to get me to go to meetings. And I knew that with how sick I was, that I needed a lot more than that. By that point in time, I was praying to my my dead family members. I was thinking about friends that had passed because I knew it was going to be me. I literally couldn't stop. So while I was in there getting high, I would often watch YouTube videos. And, I had this really interesting idea. One of the things that I had gotten in trouble for was LSD. I had toured with the Grateful Dead, by the way. Don't want to digress, but today is the anniversary of Jerry Garcia's death, just coincidentally. And, I'd had many years that I toured with the Grateful Dead, and I sold a lot of acid. And I'm not talking about a little bit, but, 10,000 to 50,000 hits at a time. And so when I would do acid, I would do these tremendous amounts. And I had this bright idea. I still had money, and I would go down to South America. I would find a cocaine shaman, maybe do some psychedelics, and I would live on the Amazon. That was how I was going to spend the rest of my life. And so I Googled it. I figured that would be the answer. I found this video by this gentleman. His name is Gabor Mate. He worked in East Vancouver with addicts to alleviate their suffering. And he worked in a MAT clinic. So he worked with a lot of really low end people, and people that we would call failures, that just couldn't get it right. I mean, they were really down and out, but the whole time he had this incredible sense of compassion, and he knew that they would be able to find healing. The interesting thing behind this was he began to write books on trauma, because he felt as though there was a commonality in everyone that he spoke to, that trauma was the cause of their addiction. That was brought on in childhood, very much like mine. And this was something that I had never heard of, because some of the models that we have out there, they, at that point in time, they didn't speak about this. And one of the things that became really interesting was when he released these books, folks told him that it was about ayahuasca. And this man had never heard about it. They said ayahuasca was it. He wouldn't even consider it until finally another book came out, and a number of people said, look, this is about ayahuasca. And as a physician and as an addictionologist, he went down to the Amazon, and he actually tried ayahuasca. And afterward, he said, yep, it's all true. And so in this video, he suggested a number of things that people in abstinence-based recovery begin to reframe ayahuasca as a medicine, not a drug. So like I'm an NA guy, right? I'm going, I mean, it's a mood or mind altering substance. And how can you take a drug to solve a drug problem? And worse yet, what were all my friends going to think? I mean, I didn't know what was going to come of it. However, I was absolutely desperate. And so that was what led me into this. At first, I used Ibogaine. I used that with an underground practitioner in Gainesville, Florida. Shortly afterward, I began drinking ayahuasca. And that's where I'm going to kind of leave my story. But what I will say is this. I ended up with about 4 months. I ended up with about 4 months, and I made a number of choices that led me back out to use. And that's the reason why I decided to recommit, to really learn all of this stuff. And that's why it's such a privilege and pleasure to be here, because truly, I should be a person I should be dead or in prison, you know. And you're going to find a lot of stories like this with people that just couldn't seemingly make it up any other way, but were given an opportunity to use one of these tools, because that's what they are. They're tools, they're catalysts to help people to see if, you know, if they're able to find something a little bit different. So some definitions that might help you. A psychedelic is a substance that causes effects of the mind that usually involves strong experience of color, sound, taste, and touch. But one of the things that goes along, is connotated with this, is hallucinations or visual imagery. Now, the roots of the words are psyche and delos, which means to mind manifest. Another word, which is used sometimes interchangeably, is an entheogen. Typically, these are of plant origins, and they are used to bring a person out of this world into another. They're usually used for religious or spiritual purposes. And one thing that's different with an entheogen is sometimes they don't have visual effects. They don't, it's just a total internal process. And so that kind of leads to the whole thing with the word. You become divine within. You're able to find God within you. You'll also hear the terms plant medicines or plant sacraments. And these are just words that are used interchangeably to describe plants and that have psychoactive content. Most of these are used in ceremony, and they can be prescribed by a practitioner, usually a shaman or someone who has a significant amount of training. So everyone's asking, what is psychedelic assisted recovery? Conversation came up with this with another person in CCAR. He said, is this like MAT? Is this like Suboxone? Is it like methadone? And it's not. It's not a replacement for anything. However, these substances do promote recovery. They accelerate the recovery process, and some actually interrupt addiction. So psychedelic assisted recovery is just a pathway to recovery. It means that it's not for everybody. It means it's just one of many, and it encourages people to use psychedelics mindfully, intentionally, to promote healing, personal growth, and to achieve overall well-being. Now, there's a couple different parts of this, because PAR is like, it's a global word, because it would be unfair to say, well, it's just psychedelic assisted therapy. Now, psychedelic assisted therapy is usually done under the medical model. And you will see this with ketamine. You will see this with MDMA. You'll see it with psilocybin. You may see it with LSD on the underground. Psychedelic treatment usually refers to Ibogaine, and that's done under some very heavy medical monitoring. But again, this is done by licensed professionals, and there's almost always a nurse or a doctor on staff. There's also harm reduction. And God, by now we all know harm reduction covers everything. You know, where it's specific to psychedelics is this. There are people that say that these substances have the possibility of causing harm, and there's ways of reducing that by creating best practices. There are other folks that say it's replacing a drug for a drug, so that's kind of harm reduction. And you also have practitioners that just disregard the law. They feel as though what they're doing is so important and they're helping people that the law doesn't apply to them. So, you know, you'll see people post, well, I'm doing harm reduction today. And you know what? It was a harm reduction practitioner that saved my life. So I appreciate that. However, I think that this term will begin to fade out as we show that these substances do promote recovery. And when you go into a hospital, they don't say we're about to do harm reduction. They give you a list of best practices. Now, one thing that we forget about is the religious and ceremonial use. And it's interesting. As a paralegal, I work with a lot of these practitioners. I help them to establish best practices for their church, and I do filings. And there are folks that they hardly have more than a high school diploma. They just have a lot of experience, and they've helped me probably more than assisted therapy would. So, there's ways of getting to these medicines religiously. And in the United States, there are tons of churches that offer people the opportunity to come to them for healing ceremonies. You're going to see clinical research and trials. Now, this wasn't all that big a few years back. There were some people that were very affected by this, and it did change their life. They're out there speaking about this. However, now we're beginning to do a lot more research to see which afflictions that these medicines help people with. A good example, Johns Hopkins just announced another trial that they're doing for psilocybin, alcohol use disorder, and depression. And if you were to Google that, you might be able to find that out. One thing that people, again, fail to realize is their self-use. People might hear what I say. People might read something on the internet. People might get desperate. There are other people like me. I live in Florida, right? In Florida, after the rains, in cow pastures, you can go and pick your own mushrooms. And so, from time to time, about every 45 days, I sit with mushrooms. So there are going to be a lot of people that come to this with self-use. Talk very quickly about the history, like how did psychedelics get into recovery? And, as we retell a lot of the stories, like we're looking back and realizing that history probably wasn't written the right way, that there are things that we forgot about, or maybe we didn't know, what really happened at the time. And this is a really good example, right? So Bill Wilson was a self-admitted alcoholic. He struggled with depression. By all rights, he should have had it made, right? He was a military veteran. He was married to a beautiful wife. He was a stockbroker, but the man couldn't stop drinking. So one of the things that was very predominant at this time were these cures that people announced. And one of them that showed to be fairly effective was the belladonna cure. It was most well-known through Charles Towns at Towns Hospital. He worked with Dr. Sam Lambert, who ended up being the personal physician of Teddy Roosevelt. So, there was some real clout behind this. So both on time number 3 and time number 4, Bill Wilson went to Towns Hospital. On time number 3, he didn't really get all that much out of it because he went to drink. But on time number 4, he did the mixture of belladonna, henbane, and prickly pear. Now, there's 2 things behind that. First off, they really didn't understand that it was something that was working in the mind. We were looking at addiction as being a physical malady, perhaps a spiritual malady where people were possessed by something. And these were seen as physical purgatives, and the results were seen as these miracles that went along with this. Now, if you just have the opportunity, here's a copy of AA's Pass It On. And if you read what Bill Wilson says about his white light experience, I mean, this does not sound like DTs. When he speaks about laying on the shore of a new world and thinking that this must be a great reality, these are the gods of preachers that speak about a white light experience. It was because belladonna it's a really strong deliriant. So is henbane. In fact, they have scopolamine in them. That was used by the CIA as a truth serum. And if you read any Carlos Castaneda at all, Carlos Castaneda worked with datura plants, Jimson weed, and these power plants brought him into a new level of consciousness. And we didn't know that at the time. In fact, one of the important things to realize with this is, I think that between Bill and Dr. Bob, they realized that this was a once in a lifetime experience. And that was why they wrote the chapter on the varieties of spiritual experience. It says right in there, not everybody's going to have this, but somehow we thought that it did. So if you're not a believer by this point, right, Bill is introduced to a number of doctors. They're working in British Columbia, and they're treating schizophrenics and alcoholics with LSD. But at first he's not for it. It's very confusing, but the numbers are high. They're in 40-45% that people are stopping drinking. So you have to realize, like in the 50s, LSD was legal. There were no regulations. And Bill said, you know what, I may give this a try. So he went to the VA clinics in Los Angeles, and he began working with a Gerald Hurd, Sidney Cohen, and he actually brought some other founding members of AA with them. There were also others that didn't do LSD, but they were there. Now, this is where it gets to be interesting, right? Bill writes to Dr. Cohen, and he tells him, look, this is just like my white light experience. So at that point in time, we begin to realize, maybe there is some sort of connection. Now, Bill went ahead and he used LSD for a few more years, but there was a lot of public outcry that went through the higher ranking AA folks, and they came to him. They said, you really can't do this. And he stepped away from it. However, he did admit that it helped him with his depression. But more importantly, he said it provided him that spiritual experience that he so much longed for. Now, LSD, right? It was discovered in 1943 on April 16th by Albert Hofmann, right? LSD is it starts off as a fungus, ergot, which grows on rye plants. And like we've known for a long time that or maybe we haven't known, it's done a lot of things. We thought that it was involved in the Salem witch trials, that people ended up having these hallucinations. So as one of the results of high doses of this, we found that people got gangrene. And so they were trying to do research that would use this as like a vasodilator almost. It would help with gangrene, but more importantly, it would help people with migraine headaches. And during one of his first experiences in making this, he took what was about 1.5 grams of salt worth of LSD, which we'd know probably to be a very large dose. He thought he went insane. He didn't know what went on. He had to be taken home, but yet the next day he had this incredible feeling. He wanted to look into it. Sandoz was not amenable. And, it took a little bit of work, but they realized something. LSD can mimic schizophrenia. And because that we realized this was something that was a mind issue, we began to use this research to develop SSRIs. That was where all this came from. And don't forget that LSD was used in therapy. In fact, Cary Grant, the well-known actor Cary Grant, stopped drinking with the use of LSD. Now, in the United States, it is still a controlled substance. And out of the methods that I mentioned to you, it is used in harm reduction or underground psychedelic-assisted therapy, clinical trials, and self-use. All right, so we're talking about ayahuasca. Ayahuasca has a number of names: ayahuasca, yahe, daime, and it's made by blending a vine with a leaf. The vine contains harmaline and harmine, which are mayo inhibitors, and the leaf is in most cases is chacruna leaf. And they may use other substances, but they all contain DMT, dimethyltryptamine, which is the strongest psychedelic substance known to man. It is something that's natural. It's something that is found most in our bodies when we're born, when we die, when we dream, when people have near-death experiences, perhaps during deep breathing and meditation. That's why these yogis are able to do a lot of stuff. Now, I mentioned the primary ingredient is DMT, but the secondary ingredient is a mayo inhibitor. So this is where it gets to be interesting. There's a history behind yahe or ayahuasca. This has been used we've been able to show, like if you look at National Geographic, they found a mummy. It's been used for at least 1,000 years. But I just drank when my mom died in February with the Kofan tribe. And the Kofans have been using ayahuasca in healing ceremonies for 5,000 years. So this has been something that's been going on. And it wasn't something that was known about until a person went down there, wrote a paper on it. And then, if I remember right, William S. Burroughs found out about it. And that was when it became popularized. Now, some of the studies that are out there show that ayahuasca helps with some of these traumatic issues we have due to the short time that I have to present. I'm not going to talk about epigenetics, but what happens is when parents have real traumatic issues, certain genomes in their body are repressed, and we've shown that those get passed on to the children. So right from birth, children are accustomed to trauma. They have higher cortisol levels, and it's shown that ayahuasca in particular can help with this. Some of the other things that are out there that are also used religiously, Iboga, which is Tabernath Iboga. Very interesting story, right? The Pygmies, they had initially found this. There was a shaman, he was hunting, he killed a hedgehog. He took the hedgehog back to his wife, she cooked it. While he was gone, she ate some of it and she had these incredible visions. So they, like anyone else, would try to find out why, and they found that had eaten this plant. The word translates to care for, to heal. It was interesting that once these folks found out about it, they began to use it as a medicine. It was used as an aphrodisiac, as a tonic, and in some cultures, it's also used as a rite of passage where young males will drink this. Now, while we knew about the ritualistic use of this for a long time, we found Iboga in particular to be very, very, very helpful with opiate addicts. The rates are incredibly high for their recovery. Now, it is something that is used primarily ceremonially. However, there's another side to it. We can take out one of the alkaloids, just one of the substances that's in Ibogaine, or it can be found in other plants at lower concentrations. And this really has an impact on addiction. In 1962, Howard Lozoff was a student, but on top of that, he had a really bad heroin addiction. With some other students, he did Ibogaine, and he found that he had no withdrawals. He had no desire to use. He coined the phrase addiction interruption therapy. He presented this, and they did research into it because of some of the political stigma. They didn't want to pursue it. The research shows that these treatments are about 85% effective. They're very, very, very highly effective for people in recovery for 12 to up to 36 months. You know, one of the biggest resistant pieces with this is that Ibogaine can cause abnormalities in heart rhythms. So before people do this, they have to get an ECG. In addition, parts of this metabolize in the liver. So we also have to make sure and screen people to make sure that they don't have pre-existing liver conditions. And those are some of the biggest concerns. However, there are a lot of medical professionals that are working right now to make sure that this is safe and that is effective and that it becomes more readily available. Now, everybody's favorite, right? Psilocybin. Now, really fascinating story. These mushrooms grow all over the world, but the place where they became most popularized was out of Mexico, right? Interestingly enough, when the Spaniards came to Mesoamerica to bring Catholicism there, the people could not read the Bible. They did not understand, but yet they had a deep belief in Christ right off the bat. And so they actually began to use mushrooms in their ceremonies to help them to establish a connection with the Creator. If you take a look at any of the folks that still do this, they are very heavily influenced by Catholicism, bring that into their ceremonies, even have basilicas. Now, this was something that was underground for a long time until you had R. Gordon Wasson go down there. When he did, he brought a shaman down there who brought the plants to Albert Hoffman, the guy who discovered LSD, and he was the one who isolated the active compounds in this. Now, while you'd think it was a neat story that they brought some attention to this, you had a lot of different people go down there. Geez, the Beatles, Led Zeppelin, the Grateful Dead. They actually have an album called Oaxaca, which is about their experiences. The Allman Brothers. So that's why they have mushrooms on their the covers of their albums. And this brought a lot of people down there that wouldn't have been there normally. It not only disgraced Maria Sabina, who was the like one of the greatest curanderos who brought this, but it also disgraced the Mazatec lineage. So it is really a double-edged sword. However, it did show that this substance really helps people. Again, Schedule 1 controlled substance used religious, ceremonially, clinical trials, self-use. What I will say, and we're going to talk about in a second, the legalities in this are going to begin to shift. Now, don't know if you know this guy, but this is Mike Tyson, right? And if you go ahead and Google this, he actually does an interview on this on Sports Center. Don't know if you've seen it before, but during the interview, he weeps. And he talks about how he didn't feel as though anything that he ever did was worthwhile, that he really had to take a hard look at his life. So immediately, might bring your attention to this. 5-MeO-DMT is an excretion which comes off of the Colorado River or Sonoran desert toad. It's something that's scraped off, it's done safely, and it's administered by a trained practitioner. The thing about it is it contains both DMT and bufotenin. Bufotenin is something that's in mushrooms. It's in some other plants, to include yopo seeds. And one of the most fascinating things about this is that they've done veteran studies in this, and they found this to be extremely helpful with PTSD, with addiction, depression. This is something that's a Schedule 1 controlled substance, and it's primarily used in religious or ceremonial settings, and it's also used in clinical research. Now, one of the ones that everybody wants to talk about here, right? Ketamine. Ketamine is a dissociative anesthetic, right? It was discovered in 1962 at Wayne State University. They were looking for something that was safer and more effective than PCP. At first, one of the things that they thought they would be using it as is an animal tranquilizer. They did use it on volunteer prisoners who had some of the same feelings that other people describe. It gained prominence in Vietnam. It was very effective as a painkiller and stimulant. However, it became widely abused, and it also found notoriety. It found notoriety due to recreational use during the 1990s. One of the things that people did was it was very widely available in veterinary clinics, and people would steal that and would use it on their own. Now, they found that ketamine infusions, when it's used IV, help to treat depression, PTSD, and alcoholism. It's considered a Schedule 3 substance. Prior to 1999, it was available over the counter. It's perceived to have a low to moderate potential for abuse. But what I can say is this, it's legal. So because it's legal, there are a lot of people out there that are offering this right now. And it's very important before we send a recovery to use this, that we qualify their practitioner, we vet them. Because since anyone can do this, it's very important that people have very specific trainings and certifications, and sometimes experience in the area that we're trying to heal in. In addition, ketamine is also available online. There are folks in the United States that are able to give this by telemedicine. They give it in what's called a troche, and a troche is like a lozenge that goes in the mouth. People suck it, and then they sit on a Zoom like this, and they work with someone. Now, two things about that. It's very low dose, and often they encourage you to continue to do it. So that's certainly something to keep in mind. Before you do that, with ketamine, do your homework. MDMA, geez, the Germans, they were developing all sorts of interesting stuff. And if you take a look at the last part of the word that MDMA stands for, it's methamphetamine, right? They were looking for something that controlled bleeding. They were looking for something that may stimulate their soldiers, because at that point in time, Germany had a lot going on. Now, MDMA is considered an enactogen or an empathogen. It's something that provides connection. It gives emotional openness. It allows people to speak about things that they might not normally be able to talk about. And one of the interesting things behind this is that we don't know exactly how it works, but we know that it's very effective. Now, we did find it to be very helpful in the late 70s and 80s. However, recreational use was what brought an emergency ban on MDMA in 1985, made it a Schedule 1 substance. But at this time, MDMA is in phase 3 trials. We plan to have it rescheduled by the end of 2023, and prescriptions should be available in January of 2024. It's used in therapy, clinical research. You do find some people that use this in self-use. And, one of the reasons that I haven't spoken a lot about how these substances work in the body is partially because of time, but because of something else. Each one of these medicines provide a mystical experience. And it's during these mystical experiences that people feel a connection, a sense of transcendence, this interconnectedness. And, the best way to describe this, if you haven't done psychedelics, is think about being in a dream. Think about being in a dream while you're awake and going through some of that process, and think about how meaningful that might be to you. Now, this is usually where the most healing takes place, because, there is no more, sometimes when I do mushrooms, there is no more me. Like I'm not there. I'm somewhere else. I've closed my eyes and I felt like I've lived 10,000 lifetimes. Now with this, we always have to ask ourselves, like what's real and what's not. So if you think of that, what I'm saying with mystical experiences doesn't have any validity, here's some of the research studies that they did. And what they found was that the higher the mystical experience, the higher the rate of recovery, the higher the rate of change. So that's something really important that we need to take a look at. With that, I mentioned research, right? In 2014, psilocybin was used as a cessation agent. It was used primarily with people that had tried to stop smoking 6 times or more that couldn't do it, and they were comparing it to Chantix. Chantix was at about 25%, and psilocybin was about 80%. Now, they continued to do research. They used psilocybin for treating alcohol use disorder in an NYU study. They found it again to be very effective. Now, the thing I'll mention on the first 2 studies is they were small. I think the first was with 12, the second one was with 15. So these were very, very, very small studies. In 2017-18, the University of Alabama, Birmingham worked with psilocybin. The University of British Columbia did a co-study with LSD to see if it impacted criminal behavior. They did find results in that. Now, one of the things that really fascinated me was that psilocybin was used to treat cocaine disorder, the roots of the issue. Now, they found 11 people. This study is about to wrap up. Most of the people were off of the streets, had no experience with psychedelics, were lower income people, marginalized, and they found that all 11 people either stopped using or had these very large breaks, just one episode of using, and they would go back to abstinence. So that really says some stuff. Now, with that, I've mentioned NYU, I've mentioned the University of Alabama, Birmingham, and I've mentioned Johns Hopkins. And in 2021, they were awarded, Johns Hopkins was awarded the first grant by NIDA. And it was the first one in 50 years, because they truly believe that psilocybin will be a great catalyst to help people stop smoking. And this is one of the ways that we believe that it will be rescheduled. We truly believe that when the results are shown, that will be the way that psilocybin will be rescheduled. Now, one of the things I have mentioned, I don't know if you heard me at the beginning, but psychedelic integration, right? What happens is when people decide to do a treatment or a ceremony, there's preparation beforehand and there's integration afterward. The preparation beforehand can be done in two parts. The first thing is you're going to want to make sure people aren't on medications that counteract some of these medicines. For instance, with ayahuasca, you have to make sure that people aren't on SSRIs beforehand, because otherwise they may end up in SSRI toxicity. So beforehand, you ask people a lot of questions. And even though you're a coach, right, it's still important to do, because you have to always cover for your provider and watch out for your recovery. Now, the second part of that, and this is more in tune for a coach, every one of these substances, medicines, is based upon intention. So what your intention beforehand is what you're able to work on. In a lot of cases, I've worked on grief. I've worked on finding a spiritual connection. I've thought about personal problems that I've wanted to work through. In addition, right, there will be people that will suggest change behaviors. Some of those may be less sexual contact, either with your partner or with yourself. Change diets, where you'll eat less meat, where you'll eat less cheese. With ayahuasca, you can't eat fermented foods beforehand, because that's something that will interfere. So beforehand, there's a preparation process. Then the person goes through their treatment. In some cases, they'll actually do the therapy, like with MDMA, they'll do the therapy in the middle. But in a lot of cases, they do it afterward during this integration period. Now, that can be done with a lot of people. That can be done with a therapist. It can be done with a clinician. But there's also wonderful opportunities for coaches there that not only have basic knowledge about these substances, but also have a lot of experience, because it's very hard to guide somebody through something if you don't have personal experience. However, integration for me is like, I'll usually ask people, like, what happened? You know, what did that mean to you? And how will you incorporate that into your life? You know, and just by asking those three questions, people will find things during their experience that were the most healing to them. Or maybe for me, you know, that I found connections with my mom when I did ayahuasca. You know, I found some very deep connections. She'd only been dead for a few days, and it was just a fluke that I was there. So those are things that I remember and I've brought back. Now, the one thing to say is there are people that just suggest integration afterward, but I really want to remind you, it's important that people prepare beforehand and people integrate afterward. One of the things you'll hear, that like a catchphrase that's used with this, is shadow work, right? It's a term that Carl Jung used. Like, it's where we really take a look at our darker, nasty side. And, you know, for me, that's very important, right? You know, I have it in me to become the man that my father was, you know, and I say that with all humility. You know, my father was a very wonderful, loving man, but he was very, very, very ill. He came over from Germany after World War II, and I carry that. So that's something that I look at. I also look at his defects. I look at his stuff, because by healing myself today, I'm still healing him. Now, when you speak about integration coaching, please realize that it's not a replacement for therapy. It's not replacement for counseling. You know, it can be done by a licensed professional, but support staff can really help with all this. Now I'll share with you a little bit about my ayahuasca ceremony. You know, my mom had died in February. It was after a very brief illness. You know, geez, I guess I knew that she was going to die for a long time, but I didn't think she was going to die that way. Right? She ended up getting COVID. She got back from the house, and I realized what it was today. She came back home to die. You know, that was it. She was going to die right where she was at. So, you know, this is my mat on the side. You'll see some of the stuff that I brought along with me, and I'll mention some of that in here. So before any ayahuasca ceremony, again, you're going to want to look at the SSRIs. You're going to want to make sure people aren't on Mayo inhibitors. You're going to want to ask people if they're taking stimulants, herbal supplements, right? It's really important to ask the people who you're working with a little bit about them. You know, don't take anything that you find online or on a retreat listing site, even if it has 1,000 5-star ratings. Do your research, do your homework, you know, do your research into ayahuasca, right? If you're going to do it, learn as much as you can about it. Become curious, ask questions of the people who you're working with. You know, you can see my little thing on the side, right? You guys ever see MacGyver? And anybody, I don't know if anybody, if I've said anything, but I'm kind of like the MacGyver of the plant medicine world, right? I bring all my stuff with me, all these books. I bring my singing bowl. I have my purge bucket there, which we can talk about in a second. I have sage. I bring a mat. I have absolutely everything that I know that I'll need. We spoke about it a little bit, right? Everything that I did with psychedelics when I was younger was mindless. It was to get high. It was to go to concerts with, and there's a big difference between that mindless, non-intentional use stuff for fun, but there's also a time when it's for healing, and the intention is a lot different. The intention takes, this commitment, a dieta, this changed behavior, this commitment to being a better person. You're only going to receive what you're willing to ask for. Hey, you can never have enough toilet paper or water when you go to an ayahuasca ceremony. You're going to want to be drinking toilet paper. Geez. You're going to want to be drinking water. And as far as the toilet paper goes, I don't even bring toilet paper anymore. I bring wet wipes. And I'll say this kind of jokingly, with ayahuasca, it really goes through your system. It encourages you to purge. So if you think you're going to fart, you need to use the bathroom. I promise you. I've made the mistake one too many times. Now, you have to be sure that you have the time reserved to integrate afterward, right? With this, it isn't like you're going to sit with ayahuasca and the next day everything's going to be okay. Sometimes you need a day or two to really think things through. And one of the things that I found effective, if possible, bring a notebook. Write down some of the stuff that went on so you can remember it later, or perhaps bring videos, even make videos. When we speak about people in the 12-step community doing plant sacraments, right, I think that folks are like, wow, how can I do this? And so, an idea that I had was to compare it to the way we do the 12 steps. So you'd say something to the effect with that, I can't, but he can, and I think I'll let him. So with ayahuasca, with psilocybin, it's the same way. I can't do this. I can't get over this. But, you have to realize that these plants have some sort of consciousness, and I know that that's hard for people to understand, but somehow they're able to bring us somewhere else, and they're able to provide us this deep connection. And I've been mentioning this, that folks have been doing this for thousands of years. So we ask the spirit of the plant, can you help me? And then finally you surrender, you release, no expectations. Whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And you go through a process, this dreamlike state. Now you'll see my purge bucket there. And I'll just hit on that really quick. A lot of these substances are purgatives. And with ayahuasca, I will at points of time say, I'm ready to purge. I'm ready to get this out of me. And when you compare that to step work, and that's the same thing as, doing a fifth step. You're just you're admitting to the world what you did, what went on, what you can't control. And then when you do the purge, you're able to release all of that. Now, a lot of the times, right, we speak about the words that we use, and there's some more supportive words that we have out there. So perhaps suggestions, right? What if instead of using the word drug, we use the word medicine? What about, like, instead of using the word trip, we use the word journey or do inner work? And I think trip, that references that mindless use, maybe unsupervised use. What if instead of using the word client or, God forbid, consumer, we use the word participant? They suggest this in CCAR's RCA, Recovery Coach Academy training, that we call people participants, because especially with working with these substances, the best therapists, the best coaches, you're a guide. You might ask questions, you might throw in suggestions, but it's really up to the recovery, not only to go through the experience, but for their own healing. So by saying anything less, we end up disempowering them. So, and I think I presented this a little bit before. If a person came to you that was an abstinence-based recovery and said they were considering using psychedelic medicines, how would you be supportive? What words come to mind? Like, how could you encourage them? how could you help them to make an informed decision? And then I'm going to ask you again, would you still consider them to be abstinent? Now, I'm going to say this with a roar, but I sit in ceremonies with people that are in long-term recovery that have 20 years, 25 years, 30 years, and they go back to the rooms, because they see this, and that's something that's to thine own self be true. But would you still consider them abstinent? Really? It's an interesting question. I do want to remind folks, and the language that we use is really important. And again, this is out of the RCA training manual, right? William White reminds us that the language that we use can empower or disempower, humanize or objectify, engender compassion or fear and hatred, motivate or deflate, comfort or wound, or unite or create enmity. So those are things to think about, like what words can we use to encourage people? Because again, people have their own choice. Now, interestingly enough, right, when people go to the rooms for a long time, a lot of the times they'll begin to broaden their horizons. So if they go to AA and NA, they might start going to CODA, Codependence Anonymous. Adult children of alcoholics, they may move into other perspectives like Dharma recovery or Celebrate recovery, meetings that are more specific to their needs. But so after using psychedelics, some of those people that I mentioned to you, it's important to them to say what happened, how they got there. And, unfortunately, folks are misunderstood, discouraged, so it talks about, that Spencer Herbert quote in the big book at the end. I think it's in Varieties. Is it Varieties of Spiritual Experience, or is it chapter the agnostic? I don't remember, but it's contempt without prior investigation. And when people share this stuff in a meeting, it can violate the traditions and it can confuse people, just like Bill Wilson did, right? Except it's much more prevalent today. So post-psychedelic experience, there's often a desire to move into targeted recovery practices. So what people usually come to me and ask is, well, I've been going to meetings for years, but I have a God of my misunderstanding. I don't understand. I don't know. I've never had a connection. And this is an opportunity for them. People come in just like me with these grief issues. There are these repetitive behaviors. Sometimes we don't recognize them when we're in long-term recovery, but we end up recognizing these small patterns of things that we've carried on. This has been a way that things that people in long-term recovery have found psychedelics helpful for. Now, just like people come into the rooms and they end up finding other ways to recovery, people in psychedelics, they try a bunch of different things. So this is where you're going to encourage people: breath work, the Wim Hof method, internal family systems, sound healing, deeper commitments to meditation. You'll see a lot more people that are vegan. Finally, right, this can lead to a changed perception of substances. You will find a lot of recoveries that are comfortable with medical marijuana cards, and that fits hand in hand with this. So it's certainly something to think about. I'm going to add to this, and you're going to hear a lot about this. And I want to let you know that everything that I've shared up to this point, look, my mom was a counselor. I had been going to meetings since 1981 with her, since 1989 for myself. I love the 12-step rooms, and I truly believe in our treatment professionals. But, there's a little bit more to the disease model. I certainly found that through psychedelics, I have found that what Gabor Mate said was true. A lot of the work that I had to do was probably even past ACOA work. It was stuff that I probably couldn't put on paper. It were things that I needed to think out and actually go through these emotional processes to be able to experience. And I think that my mental health has been most responsible for my addiction, and so you're going to find people that speak about with differing opinions about the disease model. So we're going to, there are I just dropped one of my books. I apologize. We need to find places for people to go. One that after that they have psychedelic experiences, or especially if they're in self-use, that are supportive of them. Right now we have very few. Smart Recovery is one. However, they don't have any meetings that I've been able to find that are specialized towards psychedelics. However, you do have a really neat group, right? It's called Psychedelics in Recovery. You can see their preamble here. It's not much different than that of Alcoholics Anonymous, and that's because it was inspired by AA. It's a fairly small group. They have 2,600 members, 25 online meetings with in-person meetings in San Diego, Los Angeles, San Francisco, Denver, Austin, Ann Arbor, New York City, and Iceland. Iceland will be coming soon. So it's an international program. And essentially people from all 12-step rooms can come there. And where it becomes interesting is they have they'll have an ACOA meeting that's specialized for people with psychedelics. I've been to some of the ones that are like SLAA meetings, which deal with sexual issues, relationship issues. I've always found that to be my relationships with women was always a stumbling block, and these meetings helped. There's certainly something to take a look at. If you look at the bottom, there is a link to their website if you want to take a screenshot of that. Now I'm going to talk about some of the legalities here. And God, I'm really doing well for time. This is fantastic. You're going to see a lot of changes in the legalities that are coming up. One of the biggest ones that you'll find is starting in Oregon. What they're doing is they're medicalizing psilocybin. So what this allows people to do is if people are 18 years of age, they go through 120-hour training. They're a resident of Oregon for 2 years. It allows them to become a psilocybin practitioner. What practitioners will do is they'll go into a dispensary, they will buy psilocybin mushrooms, and they will bring them back to a recovery. They will allow the recovery to take them in their presence. They will sit with them during the experience. And then afterward, by law, they have to offer them those integration coaching sessions that I was talking about. Now, where it gets to be cool is that's going to allow, you only need a high school diploma to do it. Oregon was a very forward thinking in that, because that allows people that don't have a degree, just like I mentioned, some of these religious practitioners, to be able to take advantage of this. Some of the things that we've spoken about with this is that there are some sort of agreements, intersectionality that we're going to have to find with so if somebody had a rehab and they said, well, I would like people to be able to sit with a psilocybin practitioner here. It's going to happen. They're just trying to figure out exactly how it's going to work. This will be another catalyst. Now, one of the biggest things with this is a model law. Now, what a model law means is that it's adapted to the needs of every state, but it's shared. So you're already seeing this in Colorado. I want to believe that New Jersey has something to decriminalize, but I think that they may also have treatment centers coming up, and you'll see this. You'll see this throughout the nation. All right. Now we'll talk about Connecticut. Interesting story here. Connecticut has moved forward, or they've certainly taken a chance here. In the past year, they did research with psilocybin, and it led to this act. This act was increasing access to mental health medication. Initially, it was going to go up for a vote. They had it written out as a bill. It went through appropriations. They were trying to figure out how it was going to work. And on May 9th, Governor Lamont signed it into law. He put it in as part of the budget bill. So that requires DEMAS, the Connecticut Department of Mental Health and Addiction Services, to launch this therapy pilot program to qualified patients with funding. Now, the qualified patients are a little bit different than perhaps where they thought at first. Again, very in need population. Some of the people that have helped us out the most, they're veterans, retired first responders, and direct healthcare workers. Now, the way that this works is that this will be partially state funded From what I understand, the state will pay for half the treatment, and matching donors or grants will pick up the rest of it. These treatments are looking to be about $35,000 a piece. The standalone bill was a little bit different than what got signed, and it's good. It's good, but it's bad. It's good because we now have this framework to work with. However, I hope that as a recovery community, we strive to bring this part back, which says historically underserved community who has a serious life-threatening mental health or behavioral health disorder without access to mental health or behavioral health medication. There are some people that don't have this access. And one thing that I had immediately thought about, and I know that there are some great folks at CCAR that are working in the prisons, but geez, I spent 14 years there for reasons that I really didn't know. Now, how cool would this be to be able to get some of those folks to treatment? So again, we have a great model there, but hopefully we can expand it. And most importantly, we're going to have to find a way to support this. Now, at this time, both of these medicines are Schedule I controlled substances. However, what happens is the government, the U.S. government, is rescheduling them. Again, we're looking at the third or fourth quarter of 2023. Psilocybin, it could be 2025. Now, finally, this is going to require the state to design a psychedelic treatment board. So there has to be an advisory board to establish best practices. And I put this challenge out there. I truly hope that people in the recovery community step forward and say that we would like to be represented on this board. We need to get people on here that have experience, but that care about all of us, and I just point to ponder. Now, I had mentioned ceremonies, and again, I apologize. I know we have some people who are here internationally. However, in the United States, right, our U.S. Constitution allows people two things. It has the free exercise clause, which allows people to pretty much practice their religion the way that they want. You have the establishment clause, which allows people to make a new religion. That's why people came here. That's why folks came to the United States, was because of religious persecution. God forgive me for saying that over anybody over on the other side of the water. So anyway, we faced this religious persecution. We ended up forming our own country. And somewhere along the lines, we kind of, like, I guess, maybe forgot some of the beautiful things that went on. You have these different lineages, and one of them in the United States is the Native American Church, and they've been working with peyote for a long time in their religious ceremonies. You had two folks that were working at a rehab center in Oregon, and they came forward to their employer. They told them that they were using peyote in ceremony, and they were terminated. They were told that it was a drug, that they couldn't use it, didn't care if it was religious, didn't care if it was healing, and they applied for unemployment. And the unemployment was turned down. When their unemployment was turned down, they ended up filing with the Supreme Court. The Supreme Court found in favor of the state of Oregon. So they put in the Religious Freedom Restoration Act, which reinterprets the First Amendment, and it allows people to practice their religion as they see fit in the United States. So by making certain filings and by conforming to certain rules, you see all these practitioners that are opening churches here. These people have sincere religious beliefs to hold the ceremonies. That's what it is. It's like going to a different sort of church. Now, as we begin to wrap up here, right, I tried to cite as much stuff, like I didn't want to use any psychedelic references. I think there may be one in this whole article, or this whole presentation, except for this article. And this was out of the LA Times in August of 2021, right? And this is how it starts off. This is written by the way, it's written by Rick Doblin, who is involved with MAPS, the Multidisciplinary Association for Psychedelic Studies. And, he said, psychedelic studies are here, but doctors aren't ready. A patient asked her doctors, well, I'm getting ready to do shrooms. What do you think? Now, what would the best doctor say? And this is where I kind of venture off as recovery coaches and support professionals. Do we know enough? Are we able to be supportive to this just one of many pathways of recovery? And how do we best educate treatment professionals in this space on this pathway of recovery? And with that, I'm going to flip back to the end again. I'd just like you to reflect, if you thought about it from the beginning, if you were here. These were questions that I asked at the beginning, right? What words come to mind when you hear the word psychedelic? Has your perception changed any? Do you see things any different? Like, what would you think about people that use psychedelics? What would you think about someone like me? Someone like me with past addictive behaviors that picked up these substances because they were dying. What would you tell them? Would they be any different than you? Do you see psychedelics as a drug? Is it possible, just maybe based on what I said, to see them as a medicine, even if they're outside of the medical model? Maybe if they're issued by a shaman? Or could they still be a medicine if somebody did them on their own, right? I kind of add to this. I was on a webinar last night, and the conversation, it was by another well-known person in the recovery space, and they spoke on psychedelics. And one of the things that came up was, if you compared, say, mushrooms, somebody microdosing mushrooms, if they said, I'm going to microdose mushrooms, could you compare that to them doing Prozac? I mean, seriously, and I think that's a very valid question, because last night the answer wasn't what I'd hoped. I genuinely hope people would be able to say, well, you know what, just maybe, So anyway, finally, how do you feel about people that use psychedelics in recovery? And do you think that they could still be considered abstinent? And with that, right, I got through this material really quick. And Michael, if you're still around, I'm more than open to questions or discussion.
Definitely, I'm still here. If anybody has questions or epiphanies or any ideas, raise your hands. I know more than half of you know how to use that reaction button.
Well, I can go on. So, when you speak about the characteristics that you want in a coach that does this, you're going to want people to be informed about the law. That's one of the first things. You don't want to advise somebody to do something that's against the law. You want people to at least know some of the basic ways these medicines work with the body, to include, for instance, like if somebody asked you about Ibogaine, you'd want to ask them beforehand, do you have a heart condition? That's just something that you can ask. You also want to ask about the SSRIs on that same note, right? You want to be trauma informed. That's where this really comes in, because and I think that we're moving towards that now, where we're a little bit more respectful of where people may have been and how we can encourage them to get out. I think I saw Sandy's hand up.
Hi, Mark. Thank you very much for bringing this to our attention and being brave enough to share this with us. This is quite controversial in many areas. Not for me. I'm from California, so hey, we're different. Anyway, my son is he's been clean for over a year now, and he just started 2 weeks ago with a physician assistant under a psychiatrist, ketamine treatment. And in 2 weeks, because he's been clean and living, but the anxiety and the insanity in his brain had not gone away, and he had done some damage to himself over the years. So he is actually going through this treatment right now. Very interestingly, it is in the state of Maine, and he is given this stuff to take at home. Little, I think you said tinctures or something like that. I'm trying to.
Yeah, troches.
Troches, that's the word. Troches. And he's told how to do it. He does it with the Calm app, and he's been following the directions. And honestly, I was very, I keep my mouth shut because I'm in recovery myself, and keep my own opinion. This is his life. But I see a tremendous difference in just 2 weeks. I see a smile that I haven't seen in over 10 years when he talks to me on video. I'm very impressed by it. My question to you is there a place people can go that they can find out what the laws are per state in the United States or in Canada? Is something put together yet? Thank you.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing all that. Right. I really respect what you said, because I truly do believe that what you said will become more common, where there'll be people that become abstinent and they'll say, well, hey, I'm going to try this, and they may not ever have to do it again. So that's great stuff. And I'm glad that your son is doing well, because, I used to call my mom from the county jails collect, right? So I could have been that son, and I understand. As far as, if there's a place to go to look for the information, unfortunately, there's not. I'm hoping to change that. Unfortunately, I don't know if you guys saw my website, but I will have more information up there that should be more pertinent with this. Unfortunately, things are changing really quickly. Like when I say this, these laws, every single day that I look, there's a new law. You would do best to Google it and take a look. You can always email me. I know, as far as New England, there are going to be a lot of changes. And I know in California, they just brought the bill back out to decriminalize all psychedelics in the state of California, So, and, interesting to think about, right? So you have decriminalization and deprioritization. Decriminalization is where they say that there's no criminal penalty. Sometimes they have a civil fine, like in New Jersey, I think it's $25 or $30 for possessing mushrooms. And then you have the deprioritization, where people just say, there are more important laws for us to attend to. We'd rather deal with violent crime, or we'd rather go after hard drugs. So I hope that gave you some information, but if you write me, I'll look for you.
I will do so. And if it's possible, I'm going to give my son your email as well. I try to stay as far away from that as I can, but I do have to admit, I'm 71. I was one of those people that after it rained, I went out in cow pastures and picked the mushrooms. So I know all about that, but thank you.
You're very welcome. Thank you.
Suzanne has a question. Susan,
No, that's fine. Thank you. I am so grateful for having, just by happenstance, been invited to this by Mark. I am just blown away with the level of detail and just incredibly well supported presentation. And I commend you for your bravery and stepping up, because we are, as human beings, naturally afraid of things that are new to us. And I always, I'm a student at Johns Hopkins, so I love that you mentioned Johns Hopkins. And, Johns Hopkins is known for their amazing research, but 170 years ago, Dr. Simowitz from Johns Hopkins was a doctor who had an idea about something that he thought should be a common practice. And he was absolutely ridiculed. He was driven out of the profession. He was basically laughed out of the hospital. And his idea was hand washing before delivering babies. And at the time, it was a radical, crazy idea. And if you look him up, it's just amazing to know that we evolve, and thank goodness for curiosity. Thank goodness that we are able to say, hey, wait a minute, these things that we thought were so dangerous or scary 100 years ago, or equally important, these things that we thought were so safe, like, for example, opioids, that we were reassured that they would absolutely never be addictive. Thank goodness that we have flexible minds and are capable of learning new things. And so I just want to say, Mark, thank you so much. Really, really enjoyed this.
Oh, thank you for having me. Yeah, there are going to be a lot of changes really quickly with this, and it's going to take open-minded people. And regardless of what we think at this point in time, we don't really have any choice but to be supportive. And again, this presentation, the idea behind it is that there are going to be a lot of people that never do psychedelics, never want to do them, but only, I spoke with Michael about this beforehand, that they just want to know how to support people. They will always be abstinent, but this is just another pathway of recovery. It's just another tool for the toolbox. And you hit on an interesting point, and I missed it in some of the slides because I was so concerned with time. I apologize. I would have spoken more, but I really wanted to get all this in. This is what I want to keep in mind, right? So each of these substances, that like a lot of the ones that I mentioned that were illegal, the issue started with Lyndon B. Johnson in 1968, and when Richard Nixon came into office, that's when things really got bad with all this. And it was because of the drug war. And very much like cannabis, there was a lot of misinformation that was put out there. And one of the reasons was because all of these medicines, right? I switch between substances and medicines. They got into the hands of the bands, the musicians that everyone listened to and everyone respected, and everyone wanted to be like them. And this became a symbol of the counterculture, because when used, these definitely make you question everything. I promise you, I've sat down and I've thought about all sorts of stuff. So anyway, that was where the issue came in, was where the stigma came in, where the legalities changed, and we're seeing some change now. So thank you.
Mark, you have two people. You have Gina with her hand up, and Rich Walsh.
Great.
Go for it, Gina.
Hi, thank you so much for your presentation. It was very, very well done. Mike, I had a couple questions. My first question was, and you went over all the laws changing and everything, hopefully in the future. Do you think with, how should I say this, like recent laws that have changed and like the changing political climate at large, like it could potentially not work out, and that laws might kind of go backwards, for example, or that would
no, these are going to wow. Okay. So you hit on a really interesting point, because see, all right, the Connecticut treatment centers, right? They're not going to give people mushrooms to take. Okay. People are going to take pills. Okay. So these are going to be just like antidepressants or anything else. And all we're really doing is reversing what went on before, because we even stopped doing research because of the stigma, and they tried a couple times more. I don't think that you'll see things going backwards. I only think that you're going to see things going forwards. But one thing that I would love for people to think about, right? When I was young, I used to use a rotary dial telephone to make phone calls. And then they had the touch tone, which I thought was pretty cool. Then they had wireless, which turned into cell phones. And so now when kids are born these days, they know all about cell phones. And I promise you, when you have kids, they're going to know all about psychedelics. Psychedelics are going to be just like a cell phone to them. So this information is really especially important. Like, I mean, what do you say to your kid? if you don't know, do you stay in that old modality, or do you make it more informed? Well, hey, this was used as a rite of passage in certain societies. So maybe it's best that you wait for a couple more years before you think about this. I mean, there's ways that we can do this. So anyway, I hope that answered your question.
Yes, thank you. I had one more question too, is
Yep.
where do you think the appropriate boundary between asking those questions, do you think you have a or do you have a heart condition, asking medical questions about your recovery, and reserving those questions for a medical professional?
Yeah.
Where would you draw the line there?
Oh God. Right. Hey, what did they stay in this? Say stay in your lane.
Yeah.
Well, unfortunately, that's where this progresses. Becoming an integration coach, when you move into that, the lanes are a lot different. In fact, I have to watch out for the people that I'm working for, that I serve. So normally that is a question that's handled by the provider. But hypothetically, what would happen if I asked it and they said, yeah, I do have a heart condition, and it was just never vetted? In a way, I would be responsible. So it requires a different level of coaching where there's a completely different level of experience. And I spoke with someone about this last night, because unfortunately, if it were the lanes that we defined in the RCA, I'm not in that lane. So what I've basically done is I'm on a 8-lane highway, and it gives me a lot more leeway. And even when I coach people, rather than being a resource, I'll provide all these insights. I'll provide insights. I will help people to get to the answer. And geez, I don't have a degree, I don't have any license. However, I'm very effective at what I do because I care. I've been there. I mean, I think that's the biggest thing. So you've asked a lot, you've charged me, but I'll just tell you that my lanes are a lot different these days. And I'm sorry if I offended anybody by going out of the proverbial lanes.
Thank you so much.
Thank you. We got Rich Walsh next. Go for it, Rich.
Hey, Mark, how you doing?
Hey, Rich.
I'd like to thank you very much for today. It's very interesting. You did a great job. I think that you're definitely on to something big. I see that this is the future. I definitely see that, especially with harm reduction, the language itself changing from trip to journey, drug to medicine. I think that's huge in the recovery view and the lens. I think that's huge. I think it makes a big difference. And personally, with any type of psychedelics in my personal life that I've ever experienced, they have not been dependent. They have not been addictive. And I think I've heard about the ketamine back up in Maine for opioids years back, that it was going on. And it was just something I heard about, but to see it brought to light now, it's exciting. This is to me, I see it as the next step to the medical marijuana card, as harm reduction and that type of behavior, that type of recovery,
Yeah. You brought up a lot there. And what I wasn't trying to be rude. I was trying to pull something up. Gosh, we're in for something else, folks. And I'm going to pull this up I can't pull this up here, but I'm going to pull it up on my phone and I'm going to read you. In fact, so hey, check this out. If you follow me on Facebook's Antheo Recovery, I'm going to be posting an article every single day from all of this. But this is the article that hit me, where it talks about, geez, given the lack of treatment, given the lack of performance by current addiction treatments, the psychedelic industry has an opportunity to capitalize on a market need of disruption. And it talks about how this is a $43 million business that they're going to disrupt. And unfortunately, while I believe it to a degree, a lot of the people that are coming in don't have recovery experience. They're coming in as hard-nosed advocates, maybe. So, maybe careful of what people wish for. Like, we're actually starting to get it, right? And now it's up to us as a recovery community to support this, to advocate for it. You know, I appreciate what you said. I see this as all being so new. If you told me 10 years ago I was going to be up here telling you this, I would have told you you are high. Plain and I mean, I took NAH9 meetings into all of these facilities because I had a terrible record and I couldn't get into correctional institutions. So like that was where my heart was at. So, it requires this weird reframing. Even, you know what? And I'm going to challenge you, even in NA. So here's NAs in times of illness, guys, right? And what does it say? Our membership includes addicts who have lifelong mental health issues. We should share honestly with our doctor and sponsor, examine our motives, and decide what course of action is right for us. In NA, we have freedom to make decisions for our life and in recovery in a safe environment free of judgment. It is our personal responsibility to seek professional help when we need it. So, it's really weird how, like, if you really read that, it says that you can do this. So like, God, we have all these weird dual things, and there's a way of doing this kindly, gently, and lovingly and together, Well, what I can say is that what I did today is part of a sick. I'm looking at right now at 6 hours for people to become informed, or excuse me, it would be 12 hours. So 2 days to make people informed. And I believe that there's a certificate that should be after, like for peer support specialists, for people who've completed a 30-hour training, which allows people with strong recovery backgrounds to even become more supportive. And I'm thinking that that's a 4-day class. So those are things that may be coming somewhere in the future. And I am always looking for opportunities to come to people's institutions, rehabs, whatever, and to do this. With rehabs, there is a little bit of money involved. With nonprofits, I promise you, it's where my heart lies. I believe that this information should be shared freely, or if not, it shouldn't be the tens of thousands of dollars that people are asking for these trainings now, because unfortunately that's what's happening, right? These medical models are going to be huge. I mentioned to you, like, these $35,000 treatments. So you think about that, right? That's a tremendous amount of money for the state of Connecticut. It's funded by taxpayers. And one way that we can make those costs lower is by stepping up as a support community and saying, you know what? The therapist only needs to do this much, and we can do the rest. We can help you with the integration. We can do follow-up support phone calls. We can call the people up and ask them, well, this is where the CCAR stuff comes in. You call them up. What kind of resources do you need? Gee, you need to get to sound healing. Would you like to, where are you, what kind of food are you eating? That's where you begin to take a look at nutrition and stuff. So there's just a little different ways of looking at things, but there are some really great opportunities. And for people that are willing to step up, this is the time to do that. And you're needed. It's past the point of questioning, but I think that some of the things that I asked, like, well, what do we say to people? What do we call them? How, what words do we use? How do we become more supportive of them? And really not turn them away from this. If that's something that's someone's personal choice, how dare me? If that's what their choice is, that's what their choice is. So. Folks, does anyone have anything else? I really do want people to reach out. If you do follow me on the Facebook at Entheo Recovery. There are a bunch of articles up there that people haven't seen. Would absolutely love to hear from you. If you guys email me, if you have any input, and I'm always looking to talk to people. My time is kind of limited, but we've had a small group here, and I love each and every one of you. So thank you for being here. And thank you for all the thank yous. You're more than welcome.